Kerri, I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Thank you for coming on. A lot of things we're going to get into today, Kerri Ann, but we gotta set it off right properly. As you know, I'm big on gratitude. I believe if you start there, that's a great way for the day to begin the way how you would like it to. So give me 3 things you're grateful for today, Kerri.
That's an appropriate question. I needed it, to tell you the truth. And so I'm going to say I'm grateful to have woken up with a sound mind this morning. Take that for granted. I am grateful for a new day. And I am grateful to have clients, to have people who are in need of something from me that I can service them. That's what I'm grateful for. Yeah, thanks for asking that.
I mean, you do a lot of great things, right? You do a lot of great things, and we're going to touch into that. But, Kerri, we've known each other since 2012, so I know parts of you that people listening will be able to get to know. So I've been trying to figure out, how do I want to start this conversation? And I believe in order for to understand how a person thinks, to get to where they are, how they operate, you got to go back to the foundation in which they stood on. And a lot of times those early foundations come from our upbringing and from the beginning stages. Pickering, Ontario, right? However, coming from a Jamaican household as well, too. So, Kerri, from some of your earliest memories, what was kind of growing up like? What was kind of those dynamics like up in the household, Jamaican as well, too? So it was very strict, very school oriented.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I moved to Pickering when it was like the town of Pickering. And anybody who's from Pickering, I know Drake put it on the map in one of his lyrics, but small town, didn't really know anyone. And growing up, I guess we're starting on this note. It was interesting. Didn't know a lot as I know now in hindsight, but I didn't grow up with my biological mother. My father and my mother had lost communication, so I didn't have him in the picture. Was raised by my grandmother, who was super strict. I mean, super strict, super old-fashioned. And we had I'll just put it on a high level and say there was a lot of law enforcement involved in my upbringing around my immediate surroundings. And so I was reintroduced to this on a daily basis, which really set the path for me to want to live a different life. So I'll say it like that for sure.
Grandmother, very strict, right? And as someone, we want to see our mom or our dad or both, if we can, in the picture, obviously growing up.
Yeah.
But Kerri, was there parts of you that didn't feel like, man, like why don't these people want to be around me? Like, did you ever feel any of that growing up?
Rejection is something that I still deal with to this day. And even though I do a lot of soul searching and self-development things, it's something that I never really quite know how to address. You can acknowledge it and things like that, but definitely I really felt unwanted by my mother, making that conscious choice. Again, I was young, but even at an older age, I was like, who would give their children away? Like, I just couldn't wrap my mind on a mother wanting to give her children away and never desiring to see them again, So that was for me, and I didn't know my dad. So I was like, my sisters and I, we have separate fathers, and they one of them was present, but 2 of ours was not present. Forgive if you hear the noise in the background. My puppy has decided to choose the noisiest toy to play with this morning because she's like, oh, my mom's on the phone. Let me go ahead and get the noisiest toy. Sorry about that, fans.
Okay.
And so, it was something that I, in every facet outside of, which I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit later, was running sports. I was just naturally gifted. You couldn't deny me if you hated me.
Yeah.
Right? So it was something I dealt with a lot, even within my household, being made fun of because I'm the darkest. That was a constant. I think that there was some resentment. I don't know why, but I definitely was treated the worst out of all my sisters and my siblings.
Mhm.
So that was another thing as well. So it was just constantly like in my face. That maybe because I reminded them of my mom. I know they didn't have the best relationship. So I know that since I resembled my mother and fared more of her complexion, I couldn't figure out why. But yeah, I mean, you're hitting on the nail today. I don't know what's happening.
When it's interesting you say that, right? Because
Mm.
I know for me, growing up in a single parent household and all that we had to go through, like one of the great things about being born early, right? My mom had me at 18, 19 years old, was the fact that I got to grow up with her. So I got to see a lot of things and see her transformation. And I saw how, certain relationships that she went into, how she was treated. And so it makes me start to think as I reflect on it now, even though this conversation, just like, man, self-worth is a process, right? Like finding that step of like, man, what does that even look like? What does that even mean? What do I cling to? And I want to ask Kerri, from the some of the resentment that maybe you felt from them, is that why you kind of cling to sport? Like, how did you find track and field? Like, I've known you for all this time, and I don't know how you got into track and field, but were you seeking something to find worth in, and did track and field find you?
I mean, being in all transparency, and again, I want to make this comment. I love my family, and we have a relationship now, a better relationship now. But I actually just pursued sports because it kept me out the house.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, After school, I get to go to practice, and again, I had a somewhat of a talent, but I just really clung to it because it kept me busy, and that's the honest truth. I didn't do it. I did not because I liked it. I didn't really know that I was, like all the benefits that would come with it. It just kept me busy. So
So when you found it, did it come easy to you? Because sometimes I hear people's stories, and I'm kind of envious when I hear these stories of people say, "Man, when I picked up the football, I just knew this is what I wanted to do." But like in track and field, I tell people all the time, it's like, "Yo, it's every other sport's punishment. Like you're running, like you're running."
yeah, I was fast from a very young age. I remember being in elementary and we're all just lining up on the grass and um they're like, okay, go. And I'm just like bolting it. Again, I didn't really know because, in Canada, it's not really a sport. I mean, sports is more now evident, but before it was just like, okay, so what? Like, it's good for gym time, and that's the extent of your abilities. You know what I mean? So that's kind of what I knew because I was like, oh, it's gym time. Oh, I'm good at this. I'm going to do well in this gym class. And that was pretty much it. But when I decided to, when I saw that I would, got to high school and stuff, and I started being really good at it, um, then someone's like, "You should join a club," and I was like, "I ain't got no money for a club. Like, what am I gonna do?"
Yeah, yeah.
And it was actually pretty. I always have to give credit to Perdita, Felician, because she was the one that said, "Hey, you can go to school for free," and I was like, "Say no more." I
Come
said, "How do I
again?
do this?" She said, "Go to that coach over there and tell him you want to join a club." And I'm like, I don't have the money. But Enver Carlson, he worked with me. I didn't have any money. And he was so helpful to pay for or help me get the money to pay for a lot of the things that we did. So I credit to him for investing in me and seeing that potential, and it ended up working. But yeah, it came naturally to me to be fast, but I wasn't a sprinter. I didn't really enjoy sprinting. I preferred jumping because there was only 18 strides. And I was like, I could do 18 strides and get to the pit. Like, this is what I could do. So yeah, I love jumping. They used to call me Carrie Frog because I just had some leaps and bounds. So
Your name goes with anything that you add to it. But before we get into the collegiate side of things, because you did
yeah,
go to Oklahoma and Arkansas, we're gonna
yeah,
touch on that. Environment, Kerri, that makes such a big difference in one, seeing hope, and also understand that, like, man, like every person isn't after what you're after. What was the environment like as now you are starting to get into track and field, right? What was Pickering like back then? What were you seeing? Because every other part is like, you know, when someone sees something in you, they try and show you a little different path, but that doesn't mean you can escape the environment just yet. So how
Mm.
were you staying, one, out of trouble? How were you staying focused, schoolwork, track and field? Was there any moments that you were just like, man, I want to go to the party that they're going to, but I got practice tomorrow. Like I can't.
Let me tell you, I did not even need the world to show me what I didn't want. Um, Again, my family members chose their own path, but I had all the dynamics of what I didn't want within my immediate surrounding. There was law enforcement, there was alleged, a lot of allegations regarding, whether it's firearms or drugs or things like that, that was constantly being around, not necessarily in my home, but even like the company that would try to come by. And again, allegations of that were always around. So that took care of me not wanting to get into any trouble, because I'm like, I don't want that for myself. My sisters, they had children at a very young age, and I seen the hardship. I seen what people were saying back then. It wasn't as common as now. Everyone's pretty excited to be, 16 and pregnant. And then it wasn't. So I saw their struggle within our home. I saw, the reputation that could come with that. So I was like, well, I don't want to do that. So I was like abstaining from stuff. So as the youngest child, I got the benefit of watching other people set some paths and then being like, okay, I want that or I don't want that. So there was really no temptation for me to live that life, because I just was seeing it all the time. And I don't even think people really knew what was going on. But yeah, it was very public for those who knew, but I don't think I ever really talked about it, So I didn't have any pressures at all to do that, because I was just terrified that I would end up like some of the individuals I was around.
It's interesting you say that, because that's also how I felt. I was like, people were going to all these different parties. We had people in the neighborhood that would say, man, that's Akeem, make sure he doesn't get around anything. But for me, I was like, yo, I didn't want none of that anyway. My thing was always like, man, I always felt like, as the saying goes, I always felt like I was, two steps behind, but I always felt it was 2 times 4. Like I was so behind that I couldn't afford to not mess anything up, or at least go a different path. But you were talking to Perdita about scholarship, get your school paid for, and look, that's a beautiful thing in the Jamaican household. When you hear that, you're like, wait a minute,
right? Free money? Say no more.
So
Say no more.
how did that come to fruition? Because you finished at Oklahoma, but you started at Arkansas, right? So
Yeah.
how did that happen? I mean, that's a big transition from the culture shock differently.
Very much so. I mean, I didn't really start even the club stuff until the 11th grade. It wasn't until then that I started to drag, oh, let me join a club and do something more. My grandmother wouldn't let me at first. And it wasn't until my brother, somehow he got her to sign the form that would allow me to start, running and being part of, LASA and winning OFSA and things like that. So I was a really late start to everything. And then good thing that year, Ontario implemented, I don't know if it was that year, but that year there was a 13th grade. Usually we go up to grade 12. But in that year, there was a 13th grade called OAC. And so I stayed back for a little bit longer to make sure my grades were going, they were up well. And then it didn't take long. Like, I have no really idea how the schools found me, but I was heavily recruited. I almost broke 13 meters out of high school. I think I still hold that record, unless Tabia came behind me, but I think she may not have got my high school one, but she got some of my other ones. And heavily recruited. And yeah, culture shock going to Arkansas, where I went first. Just everything. Training was different. This school was different. Learning was different. It was a huge adjustment for me. At first, I wasn't sure if I could survive, but I was always thinking, like, hey, I'm a smart girl. I can learn this. And so I was pretty determined to utilize the resources. But even just training wise, that was different. I didn't end up keep jumping for a long time, because in Canada, we kind of teach jumps from like a European standpoint, where it's more power. versus just speed. So when I went down, my coach was so used to training everybody by a speed jumper, which means for our fans, you're just sprinting to the board and then you're going to go off up. Whereas Europeans, if you watch them, it's very slow. It's slower, but it's a lot of power that gets built up. And so that made it very hard for me. So I'm getting shin splints, I'm getting injured. And then they realized, wait, okay, you're not doing as well as you were in the jumps, but you're super fast. So we're going to put you and make you a sprinter. And so that's how I kind of got dabbled into the sprinting arena. So
How did you handle transition away from the track? Because now, for me, I struggled with it coming from junior college to us, junior college, 1,500 kids. Going to Alabama is 35, 40,000 people. And now I'm going into classes and I'm using the clicker to check in. I'm like, yo, these people don't care about me. I don't have to be here. And then, you have conference starts Thursday, but you're leaving on Monday and some teachers don't want you to make up any tests. And you're just like, Regin, like I have to do well. Like my scholarship is on the line. How did you handle that? And also, Kerri, sometimes we're getting older, right? You're 19 to 22 years old, and now you're trying to figure out, who am I? All the depths of me. Who are you in that person at that time in your own personal development as a woman?
Yeah. So as far as getting adjusted to sports, one thing that I think when I look back that I'm grateful that Enver did for us is he took us to a lot of US meets. Nice. So we were in high school competing at Duke. I remember we took one of our big road trips was to North Carolina, to Duke University, and we competed against those collegiates. We would go down to University of Syracuse and we would compete against them as well. And it didn't dawn on me, but I'm like, I'm a high schooler who just came like second at this collegiate or university meet. So getting used to that competition in the arena, and it was very nerve-wracking, but they encouraged me and I didn't know no better. I was just getting started. So I just thought that this is kind of how it was. When I think the transition just into jumps and outside of the different training and stuff like that, and in college, I don't know, like I think I got deemed the beast. I didn't know what this meant, but I was doing very well when I went down, and they were like, girl, you was a stud. Like, these new words I would just be learning about, like stud, like, girl, you a stud, and end up getting into the papers in the first couple of weeks of being in Arkansas. So I was like, oh, I guess this is going to be okay, So as far as athletic wise, it was okay. Like I said, I was just fresh. I didn't know any different. And my teammates were amazing. They were amazing at grooming me and really holding me to a higher standard. They would be like, don't come on. They brought like the fear of God in me. They was like, don't come on this track and be, not showing up. Like, you better come on, we don't care that you're a freshman. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, they don't care that I'm new. And I was so tiny. I was like 112 pounds. Mm-hmm. I'm still kind of tiny, but they really were just like, no exceptions. You're on our team. You better show up. You better show up and show out. Like, so I was like, man, these girls, they don't play. So I'm like, let me go ahead and step my game up and make sure I'm doing what I need to do. So as far as the track part, that was okay. As far as identity, that was a whole different issue. Even though I had one boyfriend in high school, and that was like a big secret. I never told anyone really, and it was as PG could be, because I was so scared that, even kissing would, land me in the situation that my sisters fell into. I was just, again, no one talked about these things with me, so I didn't really know. But even that, and seeing the attention that was coming my way, I, like, wait, well, I'm dark skinned, and, I did not like my complexion. I got teased a lot. So to hear and see, different people respond different, like, man, you so, this, and giving you compliments, I was just like, no, like, me? They're like, yeah, you. I'm like, me? I was like, so I made obviously some bad choices with that. just trying to get used to this new attention. But also, again, my teammates were very helpful in this as well, showing me the ropes and the rules that what you could and could not do. Yeah, but definitely was a time where I had to learn who I was. I would definitely say that certainly my family started treating me very differently once I went off to school. And that was interesting as well,
In a good way, or a way that you didn't quite understand?
In a good way. So, when I was at home, there was a lot going on, but pretty much it was the posture, like, you're just a kid. Like, what do you know? And I used to always say, there's a little bit of an insight. I said, man, when I'm 18, I'm out of here. I'm gone. Like, you can't tell me nothing. And that was my goal. Like, I didn't run track because I loved it. And I didn't do well in school because I love school. I only did well to prove a point, that I wouldn't be what you thought I was going to be, So it was more of a survival thing. And to be like, I told you, like, I'm going to show you, you know what I mean? So that was the whole purpose behind it. I didn't fail because I had to prove a point. So, yeah, I guess that's a lot of athletes' story as well. They're not really running it because they love it, but they're like, I'm going to show you, I'm going to become something and I'm going to show you, So, so when I did do that, it was like when I came home, I would be like, okay, I'm not coming home tonight. They're like, okay, no problem. Like, they just never questioned me again. It was like, my brother would they would rave about me and talk so well about me. And it took me a long time because I was like, well, you used to talk smack about me and
So what
say I was this and, say I was that and say I would never be good for nothing and I was worthless. And now you're trying to love me. You know what I mean? Like, so that took a long time for me to forgive them. Because when you're 9 years old and you're hearing all that stuff, you're good for nothing, worthless. And I know like most Jamaicans probably think that's like a normal thing, but it's very damaging to a child, especially that I never grew up in Jamaica. So when you're in Canada, these words, they hold weight,
Yeah, that's it's one of those blessings and I guess curses in the world too, because it's tough when you're going through it because you're just like, man, this is not like, I don't feel good about it. But then on the other end, you realize I don't like how it made me feel. So I'm going to make sure that those around me don't hear those things. It's those tough lessons. But what was interesting, Kerri, when you and I got introduced and made the team together, as I started to know more about your story, was that from 2005, you retired, in 2009 was when you came back. So there was a span where you were just gone. Like you just didn't do it. And I don't think people really understand that when you did come back, in a year and a half, you made the team, but 2005, 2009, what were you doing? What made you stop? What made you come back?
I think people, when they look at athletes or specifically NCAA athletes, they're like, oh, it's just so much, it's glamour, it's glitz, you're on TV, you're running. But you're not really a student athlete. You're an athletic student. And they will milk the heck out of you.
Come on now.
Like, if they find out that you can shot put, you are now the jumper who shot puts. Like, they are going to get their money's worth. Yeah. And I lost the love, like, after I started enjoying track, and it was fun in high school. It was fun in my first years. But then after you start learning that all of a sudden your money's on the line, you're like, oh my gosh, what? And, then you start seeing the political side of it, that, hey, if you're not performing this season, you're not going to just, there's not a happy, so, oh no, take your time and get better. No, there's no red shirting for you because that's more money for them. And it can get grimy. And that's exactly what made me transfer from Arkansas to Oklahoma. And my coach and I, we've talked about it. It's water under the bridge. But, we had an amazing recruiting class come in that year. It was Veronica, Tyson, Omar, Wallace. It was the #1 recruiting class that came over to Arkansas, and they needed money. And so even though I performed well and consistently, it was like, well, whose money can we try to take? You know what I mean? And I was like, yeah, it got really messy, but it's not all glamour. It's not all glitz. And so when I was done, I was like, yo, I'm done. I'm not even jogging. If the bus is coming and it's going to pass me by, so be it. Like, I was like, not doing anything, not a dang thing, nothing. I was like, I ran enough for my whole lifespan. And so I chilled. I lived a normal life. Like, I was like, oh, I get to sleep in. I don't have to lift another weight. It just became, it was a business. And that's pretty much what it was. So I had to relax. And the second time around, I said, okay, now when I come back, I'm doing it for me on my terms, you know? And so I wasn't running to maintain a scholarship. I wasn't running to, get my degree. It was me. I decided I was going to return on my own watch, on my own dime. And that was the difference. And it felt so much sweeter the second time around.
Yeah. And, again, like when I saw you, it was, Justin was there too. Heard about Justin, never really seen him. Perdita was there as well too. Felicia was there. I'm like, yo, these guys look clean. Like these guys are, the guys, the way how you guys operated was just a sense of confidence. Right.
Yeah.
But I remember, Kerri, he went on and made the team and I forgot where we were, but I asked you a question. I said, now that you're here, was it everything that you thought it would be? Right. And, it was different, right? Because now you came back and you were here and you did it. But your response to me was, I figured that's it. I was like, what do you mean that's it? You know what I'm saying? I was like, isn't this what you were talking about? Walk me through behind that meaning of when you said like that's it, because again, like people go to the Olympics and you're like, man, like this is what we train for, is what we work for. But for you to get there, were you almost disappointed?
And I've talked to other athletes who've had this same feeling. I think we build it up so much. When you think about going to the Olympics, you're looking at it from watching it on TV, if you've never been before, and the editing and the effects and the rings that go across the screen and the highlights. It's almost like a basketball game, right? It's so much different when you're in person versus when you're watching it on TV. And so you see these and it's just glamorized. And so you work, you travel, you compete. And for myself, I thank Anthony and Desi for really taking us outside of Canada, allowing us to travel to different parts of Caribbean and Europe and stuff like that for those. And you see the same people with you. Oh, girl, you're here. Oh, you're here. And then sometimes when you're staying at these lodges or these different competitions, you're seeing, these athletic setups. And so you get used to the certain setup of like the athletic staging place or, residing place. So when I got to the Olympics, it was a twofold. For some reason, I thought it was going to be different in looking, but it looked just like the other venues that we had stayed at. You could tell it was by the same, builder or the same people were behind it. Maybe it was the Olympic committee, that was just like, this is the staple of how the houses are going to be setting up. This is the eating residence is going to be the tent. You're going to have the different stations where you go get food. So it was just kind of like, oh, I thought it was going to be so much different, but it's like, oh, I've seen this building set up before, and I've seen this the eatery that the athletes go to before. I've seen it before. It's just like, Bahamas or just like this meat. So it was different that I thought structurally it would have been different. And then also just from a work ethic, I thought it would have made me feel different, having this achievement. But it didn't. And that was just interesting. I thought I would have filled the void. Like, okay, I've done it on my own. When I get there, I'm going to feel like, yes, I've made it. And I've accomplished something so great, but not that it wasn't amazing, because it was everything amazing. I think that void just needs to be filled with something different. And I remember even celebrities will say it, they'll say, how you feel when you make $1 million is the same thing you feel with $1 billion. It's just that because it's a temporary high and it goes away, and you have to do it again or greater in order to keep that same feeling. Like it doesn't just fill it, that void that you thought you felt, right? So, it's a constant needing to do over and over again. It's a temporary satisfaction. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where I'm coming from with that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, I kind of said the same thing. I was like, oh, the first time it was, was new, was eye-opening, just seeing how people do it. But then the second time it was like, you're there to accomplish something, right? So you're not really too fed into, oh, this is happening. It's like, no, like if you do what you're supposed to do, certain parts of your life could be impacted. But right. I'm curious, Kerri, when you were going into just normal racing, right? What was going through your mind? Because I often tell people all the time, I'm just like, man, it's often a big poker game, and it's whoever holds the composure the most is usually the one that does well, right? But when you were approaching competition, approaching racing, like, did dialing in start 2 hours in? Was there a certain playlist that you're listening to? Was there a certain hat that you would wear? Like, walk me through what preparing for competition is like, because I think it's very important.
Man, I would say in terms of like getting in the zone and in that space the night before. So, whatever, you have your teammates and you guys, you clown. If you got some good teammates, you be clowning, you've been having so much fun. But that really dies down like right before you're going to bed. You're making sure that you're getting good sleep the night before. You're intentional about, just waking up at a certain time. You got to know how the food sits on your stomach. So can you eat a full breakfast? And if you do, so you're everything is like calculated, like, okay, I need to have a good breakfast. I'm starting early, but I got a big break. I can't eat between. So then you really start calculating that. And so that's where my mind would always go. I'm sitting in silence. I'm not talking too much. I'm not, I'm just keeping it real low key. Like I'm in serious mode. You know what I mean? I'm making sure that I'm just executing right. Now, once I'm putting on like my uniform, definitely playing some music. I would say, I know it's an oldie, but like Southern bone crusher type music, like that's what's going on on my playlist, and it's getting me like crunk, like it's getting me like hype. I'm getting ready to go out. Like it's nothing soft, nothing metally. It's like I'm gonna destroy you. You can't mess with me. Like really feeding to your ego, and that is. Sorry, you can hear the puppy. That's really how I started, was just really getting in that space, playing that type of music, making sure I'm hydrated, just, going over what I need to do. And then, you get to the track, stick to the routine, don't change nothing new. Talk to your coach, he knows you're nervous, you're nervous. And then, but there comes a point when you're in the warm-up area that just goes, you're like, all right, it's it, like there's no turning back right now. Like I need to execute, and go from there.
As you transitioned out, right, you went back to the feet, you got there, now you're transitioning out of the sport again for a second time. For those who are not watching, this is Kerri Ann's dog right here.
So sorry guys, but she was doing the most below. I was trying to scoot her to the back.
Yeah. As you're transitioning out now, right? You're transitioning again, and you're not an athlete anymore again. Did you have any problems shedding that skin, so to speak, right? Walking a new path, because now you're an entrepreneur, you have your own business, you do a bunch of different things, but transition can be tough. Did you have any problems the second time as you were leaving it, just trying to figure out what was going to come next? Yeah,
for sure. Again, this is a topic I have with a lot of athletes, and it's an identity crisis. While you were, I'll start from high school, and then you go to college / university, then you go pro, and people are knowing you based on what you do, right? You're equated to your performance, and that's pretty much it. You perform well, you get the attention, you get the headlines, you get the bonus, you get this, you get that. But then once you really retire, you're like, well, who am I? I'm no longer known for this anymore. There's always someone else coming up anyways. So you're not known for that anymore. I'm not in the headlines. I'm not getting any attention. I'm just X. I'm just Kerri Ann. You know, my sorority sister used to always say this term, man, they just some local jokels, which means you're just an average person. There's nothing special to you.
Local
You know, I was like, dang, I'm just a local jokel now. Like, who am I? I'm nobody, and I had to go through this transition of debunking that my value was only wrapped up in what I could do. My identity was only what I could bring and what so that was definitely something that I had to take some time with. Even as a woman, I always, I'm trying to embrace this feminine side of me, as a woman, and you're trying to work in this regalness, right? This softness that's not always encouraged with athletics. Yeah. And so, in that space, you are very much moving in a more masculine posture, right? You're aggressive, you're just grunting, like, you know what I mean? You have these not so soft and women feminine qualities. And then you go in life like that and it doesn't work. The real world doesn't want that. It may work and transition to your job. It may help you as an entrepreneur, but there's certain postures in a relationship, even with kids, things like that doesn't really function so well. So you have to get used to be like, oh, so I can't just, come and be this aggressor and what I want. And then, you have a partner, but you're so used to just doing everything yourself and being aggressive with it and getting it. And some people call it a go-getter, some call it a boss babe, whatever you want to get it. But I'll tell you this, a lot of my female friends, Olympian female friends, are just like, that doesn't work. It doesn't work like that, right? No man wants to date a masculine woman. So it's learning how to turn that off, but you never had to before.
Yeah. It's funny. I use this illustration all the time when it comes to the switch, right? In competition, the switch is on. You do what you got to do to get the job done. When it's off, like, you try to turn it off. And I remember hearing this story about Mike Tyson and Cus D'Amato when they were training, and Cus used to get Mike Tyson hypnotized, but it would be words of like affirmations in a way, like, you are a conqueror, you are a warrior, you're here to destroy. But the joke is, when Cus passed away, he didn't tell him how to turn off the switch. So,
right.
So he became all of the things that we see, all the stuff that he would say are just things that he would be repeating as he was reading about ancient Rome and Achilles and Charlemagne and all those characters. Ever since I've known you, Kerri Ann, you've been a person of deep faith since the first day I met you. I saw you last in 2016. We got a chance to catch up, had some food. And I remember leaving, going back on the plane as we were going to Rio. I remember saying to myself, I'm like, man, it really seems like she's in a good space, right? Like, it really seems like things are lining up in many different ways. God was using you to do many different things. But the thing in life is, every season turns. You had an incident that impacted you in many different ways, and it probably hasn't been till the last year that you finally started to feel similar to like yourself. Walk me through what happened for our listeners, Kerri Ann, because it's one of those situations where, man, I've always said hope needs to be seen and shown. And it also goes back around to that saying, you never know what someone is going through when you see them.
Yeah. So I would say, one of the great things about the Olympics for me was that I really got to find who and what fills that void. And that was definitely a relationship with Christ. It was so important for me. I was like, man, even the Olympics can't feel this. I can't feel whole, by this amazing platform and, position. And then I started saying, okay, God, and I really do attribute, again, training in that 1.5-year span to really only being God. I was really out of shape to come and, make that accomplishment. So then I just said, you know what, Lord, I'm going to do right. I'm going to serve you wholeheartedly. And, tried to find an assembly of individuals who who I could grow with and who could, teach me. And the same mindset I have as an Olympic athlete is the exact same one I apply in every facet of my life. Like, you just execute well. And if it's textbook, it's textbook, right? There's no way you can cheat technique wise and things like that, like on the track. Now you may do some substance or whatever the case is, but there is a formula for being an athlete, and if you follow that formula, it just yields that result. So for me, bringing that over to my relationship with Christ, I'm like, well, what's the textbook? Oh, it's the Bible. No problem. Let me find someone or a group that follows this, because that's what I want to be. Like, I'm not trying to, especially if I'm going to give up things of the world that,
Yes.
I shouldn't be doing. There's no way. I'd be so embarrassed to know that I just gave up everything in the world and I'm still going to hell. Like, this doesn't even make sense to me. So I'm like, let me do my best to follow the blueprint. And, met some believers that really, and again, I grew up with the idea of God, but I never grew up like in a church and really seeing these things. So I ended up seeing through a wide array of experiences, some really bad things in leadership when it came to faith and serving God. A weight that I don't think that I could have carried, and things that I saw, not just to me, but even to other people. Some people didn't care what you did. It was just like, show up as you are and you're good to go. And that, again, that never worked on the track. You had people who come to practice, they'd be coming late. They'd be making you have to do extra runs because they didn't show up to, 6 a.m.s. And, you just look down on those people. You're like, yo, what are you doing? Like, if you're going to come to practice, come to practice. You know what I mean? And so the same mindset was like, how come we're just being lackadaisical in this? So I couldn't really support that. Then I met some individuals who really painted a very unfortunate picture of God, and with additional structure that was really, really heavy and a lot of contradictions. And again, I know people in the congregation are, we all make mistakes, but there's just a certain mindset that I thought would have come from those in leadership. I trust my coach. And I think that, as a side note, when I gave fully into my coaches, that's when I performed. When I gave into them fully and trusted them, that's when nothing could really stop me. And so the same thing, you see leadership, you give in and you're like, well, how come you're not really living that truth? Like, that's not, you're telling me this, but you're not really doing it anyway. So it really brought me to, coupled with the death of my uncle, seeing how, I'll share this example. So, my uncle passed, he got a stroke, and all while he was alive, I was going back and forth, and my cousins and I were going back and forth to the hospital to be by his side. He was probably the father figure that I knew the most.
Yeah.
And I would say probably only 2 people from my church went to see him and, pray for him and stuff. But once he died, everybody wanted to be on board. Oh, do you need flowers? Do you need this? Do you need that? And I was so dumbfounded. I was like, wait, are we taking glory in the staple events to show? But when someone's alive and they're needing prayer, but they're still good. Like, it's kind of like, whatever. But like deaths, weddings, these high level ceremonies or whatever, that's when we want to show our appearance and show our Christianity. And it really bothered me. And not that I was mad, but I just couldn't make sense of what was going on. You know what I mean? And it really took me back. And it wasn't just people in the church, it was even family. Nobody was really coming to see my uncle while he was alive. But once he was dead, it was like, oh man, he was so great. I wanted to do everything for him. And, and I'm like, but he was alive.
Why
and you didn't make time. And now he's dead. And now you're like crying, like, oh, he was so, and now you want to see him when he's dead. I couldn't make sense. So it just really opened my eyes to a lot of things, and that I really needed to stop looking, and I'll take the onus on myself because I'm not going to blame anybody. I needed to shift looking to individuals to show me the love of Christ for myself, right? I had to know that these people were not my coaches. And it was important for me that in this space, I needed to have a relationship with God that was just me and God, right? Yes, I would have good counsel, good people to support, but those had to be very selective in who those were. And so I take responsibility on that I needed not to look to people to show me the love of Christ, because I've seen some really mean people, and people who, don't ever want to be wrong. And when they are wrong, they never want to admit it. So those are the things that really brought me, and I'm keeping it high level because we could go deep, but I will say that in it all, and pointing out some of these things that I was seeing in the church, the problem no longer was them, it was me. It was like everything was me. Like, why, like I'm like, oh, well, the Bible says, and they'd be like, well, the Holy Spirit dictates what we do, so it was like they got to trump the word of God into their benefit, and they would keep having these excuses as to why it didn't apply to them. So I was like, am I going crazy right now? Like, this is the rules. This is the blueprint, but you're saying we don't have to follow that, as long as the Holy Spirit is guiding you. And since he's telling you, then it makes it okay. So it was really a rough place. I felt like, well, I'm no longer in the world. I'm not going to the clubs and doing all that stuff. And obviously my mindset and my understanding of what it means to be a Christian is all wrong. Like, so I don't have any, like, what am I doing here? You know what I mean? Like me serving the Bible, and they're saying, no, that's not it. This is it. And so I'm like, who am I? What's the point of me even being here? And that led to a spiral of me, just entering into a very dark period. What do you do when you give it all up to serve Christ, and the people that you wanted to serve Christ with don't really want to serve Christ,
Yeah.
And position you that you're not fit. You're not fit to be a Christian, in unspoken terms. So
Last few questions, Kerri. I want to talk about healing real quick.
yeah.
Because after the incident, the car accident,
Yes, I didn't touch about that. Yeah.
You've always been a joyful person, always been ready to crack a joke if need be, always smiling, always this feeling that uplifts your spirit. But then after the incident, man, the times that we would talk, it was like you were mustering yourself up to even be present, right?
Yeah.
And there was a lot of things that you were going through, Kerri. What did the healing process look like to get back to where you are today? Because when you're, there was a point where you'd have to wear glasses all the time to even really open the door, open the lights, or anything like that. And the side question to that, Kerri, did you ever question, man, like, God, what is going on? Like, if this is how you're gonna do it, man, I don't know if this is for me. I'm gonna just go do something else. What did that healing process do? Because during that time, there was probably depression, anxiety, all of the things that often gets pushed aside. But how and when did you start to begin to heal yourself?
Yeah. Well, I'll answer the latter question first, because it kind of goes into the parallel. I definitely got to a point where I was like, man, if if I no longer fit in with the world, and clearly I'm not fitting in with the church because I keep bringing up these things and holding them to scripture, but the problem ends up being not scripture or them, and not God. So that by default, the problem is me, right? Because I'm either, expecting us to always be honest, and that's just not going to, so I was like, man, if God had told me that this is what it was like, I would have never. I'm like, this is what Christianity is about. This is what serving God is about. And I would talk to some people in the church, and they would say, oh, but that's just church, girl. That is normal. And I was like, you knew this? So that was even dumbfounded. It wasn't just my perspective, but they were like, girl, of course, girl, that's normal. That's church. And I was like, no, no way. Like, no. They're like, no, the girl, that's nothing. Just stay there. Don't say anything and just mind your business. But I've just never been that person to have groupthink. Like, if it's wrong, it's wrong. And I'm just not going to sit there and do wrong, Yeah. And so after that point, I just said, I was like, yo, I'm done. I was like, yo, I don't know. And I'm be transparent. I was like, I don't know if it's Black people. I don't know if it's Black Christians. I don't know. When I was in the US and I was around predominantly Caucasian Christians, however they were on the spectrum, never experienced this. Never. They were just so kind and just so encouraging, and then I come up here and I'm trying to be with my own people. And I'm not saying it's all, but that it was there was a lot of tradition involved in it. So I definitely was like, God, yeah, no. And literally one day I did chunk that Bible across the room. I was like, yeah, no, we're good. Like, no. And then the next morning, it was just that anchoring of hope where God, as God kept me, was just like, this is not it. This is not it. And you need to look to me. Keep your eyes on me. And so it really started this journey where I was now like, okay, let me take it back. Forget all that people are going through. Everyone's imperfect. But let me go and find out who is really God for myself. And I just started reading the gospel. And I just started, forget about hair length, skirt length, color, hue, theology. Let me just get to know Christ. Let me get to know him for him, right? I know he has certain, that doctrine is important. Scriptures do matter, but I wanted to know him. Did he consider me a castaway? Did he consider me wrong for having the convictions to do right and stuff like that? And so that's where I really went. And that started the journey for me to say, okay, let me take a step back and just get to know Christ, right? And what did he feel about me? And how did he view me? And that's where I was like, okay, that this is something now. This is different. And do I still believe all of the teachings that I've learned before? Yes. But now I realize that there were some lies that were woven in some of those things, or heavy emphasis on some of those things that weren't really salvation issues. And so that's where I just said, you know what? Let me just examine myself, run my race as I would on the track. If you're running and you look over to lane 2 and 4, you're screwed. You're done for because you just lost focus because you're watching the other runners. And I just applied the same thing. I'm going to run my race. It doesn't matter how far someone looks like they're ahead of me, or maybe they're behind me. Run your race. And that really did a great deal of healing and forgiveness, right? And also, once I realized that, again, I had lost some things when I, went through that season, but now accepting the new me, right? There were some things that my values changed in that season. And now saying, okay, trauma does that, right? Any trauma, and I define trauma as a negative event that changes your perspective negatively on something, right? So an event that changes your perspective on a negative perspective on that. And when you go through that, whether it's a divorce, a breakup, losing a child, those give you a negative taste about that particular thing, right? Maybe you're jaded now towards marriage. Maybe you feel like, being pregnant is just not for you. Like, you lose hope and you come out a different person. And it's, what do you do with those pieces that are still intact, right? So you have to accept those things that maybe your mindset has changed on, or just examine them. But that's really, in sum, the start of that journey. And again, it did take a long time to say, okay, and believe it. Because a lot of people know scripture. We don't believe scripture. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. We don't believe that he loved me so much. We don't believe that he came for the brokenhearted, right? We don't believe those things. Like, oh, well, maybe it's for that person, but not for me. And so it took some time to not only reassess how I was thinking, but also to believe that it was true for me.
Last question, Kerri. How because that, going back to what your teammates used to say, Kerri, you're a beast. Like, that beast is still there, right? But the beast got to eat, right? So how do you stay motivated, encouraged to keep going when, yes, you can have all of the scripture and have all of the things there, but it still gets tough, right? It still weighs on you a little bit. But at this stage in your life, what helps you keep going?
Yeah, I was in a different type of beast today. The beast I was before was a very different
beast.
Well, what I'm saying is this: it's a different type. Like, it's a different heart posture within that. So when you're a beast on the track, at least before, when I was, it was a very high self-efficacy, right? And nothing's wrong with that, but there was a lot of more me than there was God, right? So it's like, Beast is like, yo, I'm gonna deal with it. Like, I'm not seeking any source. I'm not waiting on anybody. I'm not waiting to hear from God. I'm not waiting for guidance. I'm not being discerning. I'm just going out there making it happen. Like, it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. You want me to win? Okay, I'm going out there. And by all means, so it really is, all of the effort is on me, right? And I would say today, now I have that same drive, that same spirit of excellence that, the Bible, even gave to Daniel, right? And I still have that drive, but now it's kind of coupled with, okay, Lord, what areas do you want me to apply this to? And knowing that it will all work out, So I'm still have that drive, but now it's like, it's shifted to a place of true purpose. And I make sure that I am going to the Lord about these things and just moving in peace, right? There's got to be a biblical purpose, like a truthful purpose. It can't be for greed, for money. It can't be rich, and for things that just are not menial for me. So that's, hopefully that answered it. I don't know.
Yes.
No one's ever asked that question before, but that's I hope I explained that.
Kerri, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for taking time to come out. It's been a pleasure. And hearing, even though I've known you for some time, there's lots of parts that I learned for the first time as well too. So I know you're not big on social media much, but you do have a YouTube channel that is up. But what is the best way for people to connect, to contact you?
Yeah, I would really direct people to my YouTube channel. It is the Olympian Next Door, and talk about. I try to post a lot of testimonial videos that help people who are wanting to re-examine the relationship with Christ and start fresh and start new. If COVID didn't help you do that, well, I'm sure life itself will want you to do that. So, you can definitely reach me there. And I have in the description box, I do have an email that if you email me, I am most certainly going to respond. So I would say that's probably the most consistent way, and that way I don't lose it and get lost amongst my other mediums.
Kerri, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me, and everybody, stay blessed.